behind. So give me just one moment while I get this set up. And then I want to make sure I can see everything. So I'm going to have the YouTube up next to me so I can see that over there. While you all are joining, welcome. Wow, I'm echoing on myself here. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay. As you guys are coming in, I want you to tell me, one, where you're logging in from and where you, so where you're logging in from and what kind of fitnessing do you do? I kind of want to know what I am speaking to as far as, you know, are you doing CrossFit? Are you doing boot camps or just workouts at home? So let me know what kind of exercises you're doing, because that's really helpful that I can kind of speak to some of those activities as it relates to what we're going to be going over today. So share in the chat. I'm going to pull this up. Awesome. So let me actually also, I realize I want you guys to see my name. There's two of us Movement RXs on here. There's a pair hiding in the background. He's helping me with my tech things. We may end up having to switch to my phone just because earlier when I was logging on, my computer decided to turn my camera off at random times. So hopefully that does not happen. But thank you all for joining me. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you all about this. So home workouts, perfect. And also let me know if you've been dealing with any kind of injuries, you know, especially with lower back or knees. Working on the glutes is super helpful for all of that. So you see some San Diego, squats and deadlifts, awesome. Phoenix, basic powerlifting, very cool. Awesome. So keep putting in the chat where you're from, what kind of fitnessing you're into, and I'll try to speak to everything from powerlifting and CrossFit to just doing these movements at home, including not just home workouts, but, you know, bending over and picking up your kids, or picking up things off the ground at home. Like, it's applicable everywhere, not just your sport. So thank you all for joining me. I am Dr. Megan Graff with Movement RX. I'm so excited to be able to talk with you about this. Man, Germany, that is amazing. It's what, 9 hours ahead there. So thank you for joining me on your Saturday evening. So bear with me today. One, hopefully we don't have any tech issues. And two, I have a lot of allergies right now, so I apologize if I have a sneezing or a coughing fit. Hopefully that will not happen, but I'm warning you now. So thank you all for being here. So why is this topic so important? Why is it important to be able to recruit your glutes? Ultimately, more often than not, you know, you might feel really strong when you're standing up, like, oh, I can squeeze my glutes really hard. But a very common thing that I hear from my athletes is that as soon as they go to bend to pick up the weight or drop down into their squat, they're like, oh, man, my quads really take over, or maybe the hamstrings take over. And so you may never really even feel very sore in your glutes. So let me know if that's you. If you're put in the chat, if when you do any variation of squats or deadlifts, are you usually sore in the lower back, hamstrings, or quads? Is there an exercise for you that you feel like your glutes get most sore from, that you feel like you really worked them? I'm curious to hear from y'all what you feel like is best for you. And honestly, everybody's a little bit different. Everyone is built differently. So different muscles are going to work harder in different movements. There's some athletes who feel like they work the glutes the strongest in a back squat, and others who feel it the most in a deadlift or a hip thrust. So every athlete's going to be a little bit different. So I'm curious for all of you what you feel like as far as maybe heavier movements, or even if you're doing home workouts, what do you feel like hits your glutes the most? We're going to run through everything from the absolute lowest level, most basic exercise, because I want to start from the ground up. Everybody's going to be a little different on what you feel like works best for you. That's kind of the point. I'm going to be throwing the kitchen sink at you today, and you're going to learn a lot of different techniques that you can incorporate as warm-ups before workouts in order to help help you feel a little more connected to your glutes during your lifts. And then we're going to build all the way up to working on that in a squat and deadlift position. But like I said, we're going to start super basic, and you're going to feel really goofy, but I don't care. That's what today is about, to really feel like you're getting a good workout in for the glutes. So real quick before we get started, if you happen to have some bands around, so let me show you the equipment setup I have here. So if you have a big pull-up assist band, it would be good to have it handy if you're able to attach it to something. I just have a pad on the ground because I'm going to be doing some kneeling stuff, and so if you need padding under your knees, that's fine. And then just a small little hip loop. So if you happen to have those somewhat handy, go grab them. And then either a broomstick or a PVC pipe would be great when we practice standing squats and deadlifts. So I will give you a couple minutes to go run and grab that as I kind of read back through some of the chat, make sure I didn't miss anyone. Good. So everything from working out at home to CrossFit, feeling sore in the hamstrings and quads first, sometimes lower back. Don't feel like your glutes ever get taxed. That's interesting. And honestly, like without getting an EMG, so a muscle study done, it may just be maybe your glutes actually really are very strong and the weight you're doing doesn't tax them. That honestly could be a thing, and it just works your quads and hamstrings more. But I'd be curious if after we do some of these drills and you incorporate them as a warm-up and really try to focus on your glute activation during those lifts, if it changes that. If you don't feel sore, that's okay. The bigger thing too that we'll touch on as well are the mechanics for your squats and deadlifts to make sure that you are loading your hip first, that give your glutes the best chance for working hard. All right. So again, this is really important because the glutes are the strongest, biggest muscle in the body. Fun fact, as far as like relative to size, the strongest muscle for its size is actually your jaw muscle. But overall, in the entire body, the glute max is the biggest muscle in the body. So when you think about doing really heavy lifts, you want it doing the majority of the work. You're going to feel more powerful as you move, the better you're able to incorporate your biggest mover. So you really, really need that guy engaged. And the other thing too is, you know, some of the drills that we're going to play around with, and by shifting focus to squeezing your glutes while you lift, it allows you to do something different. So it's not to say it's the end of the world if you don't feel like your glutes are working, but especially if you're dealing with pain in the lower back or the knees, thinking about recruiting your glutes allows you to do a different technique when you do your lift in a way that allows you to offload any painful tissues. So if your knees are hurting when you're squatting, something you're doing is aggravating them. So with some of the stuff that we're going to go over, it allows you to do something different, which offloads those tissues. So either way, you're going to get a good takeaway from this, whether it's warm-up drills or, you know, helping you get out of pain with some of these lifts. So don't forget, we're going to be going over a lot of stuff. Maybe take some notes on the ones that you feel like work best for you as far as the drills that we go through. So I'm going to bring this down and come back here because I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff back here. So what we're actually going to start with is something really basic. So I want you to lay down flat on the ground on your stomach. So I'm not going to lay down because I'm going to show you my butt. So pretend I'm laying on my stomach. We are going to start, like I said, with the most basic movement here. And I just want you to squeeze your butt cheeks. So you're just going to squeeze them together, try to squeeze as tight as you can, and then relax it. So generally, you should feel like you're able to do that pretty easily. So squeeze your glutes as hard as you can, squeeze both butt cheeks together, and then let it go. So now, I bet you didn't think you were going to get a little twerking lesson, but here you go. So now you're going to try to do one butt cheek, relax it, and then the other butt cheek. and then relax it. So you should do this laying down. If you want to practice it standing up, fine. But we want to start with the most basic variation of this. So lay down on your stomach. I just want you to be able to, I want you to be able to look at my butt a little easier. So again, one butt cheek, relax it, the other butt cheek. So this might feel a little tougher to coordinate doing one at a time, but I want you to practice being able to squeeze separately, because again, we're just trying to build mind-body connection. Generally, this is not something we ever think about doing, much less one at a time, unless maybe you are in dance classes and are twerking. But this is a nice skill to have next time you're on the dance floor. So start with the two squeezing at the same time, and then try, you know, slow, maybe a little bit of a sustained hold. So hold for like 3 seconds on one side, and then relax it fully, and then squeeze the other side. I'll have you practice that a couple times each of 3 seconds each time. Sorry, I can feel a cough coming on. And then I want you to do a couple quick ones. So try to do a back and forth switch as quick as you can, but try to make sure you relax each separately. Probably feels really goofy, kind of silly, but you may find it surprisingly challenging. So that's where we're starting, is just squeeze both butt cheeks, one and then the other. We're just trying to start warming up that brain-body connection. So next, we're going to do side lying clamshell. So again, this is a very basic exercise that I would imagine many of you are familiar with. We're going to start without the band first, just because with this one, we're really trying to concentrate on what is working. So you can either be up or down this way. Either way is fine. Actually, I'm going to take this pad out from under me. So I am not going to be as picky about where you have your feet. Generally, you want to start with them kind of in line with your hips. But what I want you focusing on is before you even lift this top leg. So for me, it's my right side. I'm going to think about squeezing my butt cheek first. So just like the single leg butt squeeze you just did, squeeze that glute muscle, keep it squeezed as you lift up as high as you can without your hips rocking back. So if you notice, it's not a huge motion for me. If I actually lift as high as I can, it's like that, but notice my pelvis rocks backwards. So I want you to focus on only lifting as high as you can with your pelvis staying stacked. So I find it helpful to keep my hand up here. I feel like I'm in a like Jane Fonda video right now. This is the fun of doing these drills, is that they start off really goofy. So again, squeeze that top butt cheek first. Make sure your pelvis stays steady as you lift up as high as you can, and then slow and controlled down. So because you kind of preload that glute first, you really squeeze your butt cheek. So you should feel that tension build kind of on the lower and outside part of the hip. Keep that squeeze as you lift up. This should feel surprisingly challenging for you just doing a movement where you lift up if you're really concentrating on that side working. If you want, go ahead and add a band to the movement and do the same thing with a band on that side. I'm going to try not to cough too loudly into the microphone there. So do about 5 reps on that first side, and then you're going to switch sides and do the same thing. So however you had your arm and your top hand, just try to mimic the same stance. And one thing too that I forgot to mention, if you want to play around with where your feet actually are, if you feel like that helps you be able to turn on that top glute a little bit better, that's fine. That's where, you know, there's kind of general ways to do these things, but like I said, everybody's built a little bit differently. And so you might feel like you can squeeze your butt a little bit better up here versus having your feet kind of in line with your hips, or maybe it's having your feet behind you. You feel like you can squeeze that glute a little bit better before you lift. So if you feel like you're having a hard time being able to feel a squeeze back here, just like you did laying on your stomach, then play around with your foot placement and see if you're able to get it a little bit better. So again, squeeze that top butt cheek before you lift. Come up as high as you can without that pelvis rocking backwards. Hold for just a second or two, and then slow and controlled down. So you want to focus on keeping that little bit of tension in the glutes on the way down, because it's having to work to lower the leg down. So just nice slow movements, holding for a second or so, and then bringing it back down. So if you notice, these lowest level exercises are mostly about, let's just build that mind-body connection. So learning, okay, that's what it feels like when this one's turning on. I can squeeze mostly just this one butt cheek to make that leg lift up and then bring it back down. So what I want you keeping in mind as we move forward into harder and harder exercises is what it felt like when you were doing the exercise laying on your stomach on the ground. You should, excuse me guys, you should be able to feel like, you know, that strength of glute squeeze that you were able to get here and then one at a time, you should be able to get a similar level of tension in your glutes with all these other movements. So you'll notice as we add more dynamics to each of these exercises, it tends to feel harder and harder to get that same squeeze. So if anything, we're, like I said, play around with positions and try to get the best contraction that you can. And that's where it's just sometimes a matter of wiggling around, playing with different knee positions, different foot positions to find what works best for your body. All right, so now we are going to do a foot elevated glute bridge. I don't have a very high kind of step here, but if you happen to have a chair nearby, a chair or a bench height would be perfect. So you can start with, excuse me, if you don't have any equipment around to be able to elevate your feet, you can do this on a regular, you can just do a regular glute bridge lifting up, but you get a little bit better range of motion if you do it elevated. So if you're just doing it on the ground, again, before you lift up, squeeze those butt cheeks together. So notice as I do that, it actually kind of pushes my knees out slightly, and that's because not only are your glutes, especially your glute max, a big hip extender. Let me kind of review here. So the glutes are primarily responsible for hip extension. So when you squeeze your butt in standing, you should feel like it pulls your leg back, but also it brings the foot out just a little bit. So when you really activate all 6 of your butts, the glute max, the glute med, and the glute min, you'll get that little bit of outward pressure if you're squeezing all 6 of your butts. So if anything, think about gently squeezing those knees out. So as you squeeze your butt cheeks hard and then lift up and then try to keep a little bit of that tension as you lower down. So your glutes squeeze and you build that tension to drive your hips up, and then you slowly try to let go of that pressure. Think about slowly letting the air out of a tire. There's still pressure in that tire. It doesn't completely deflate. You don't want it to go like a balloon that you let go. It's more like you let the air out of a balloon through pursed lips. So if you have a surface nearby that you can elevate, I want you to elevate your feet just because you get a little bit bigger range of motion, and we want to try to work into deeper hip flexion with that glute activation. So again, before you lift, squeeze your glutes. Keep that squeeze as you lift up, and then just slowly let go of a little bit of that tension, just enough to lower you down. But you should primarily, you're going to feel this in your hamstrings, absolutely, but you should primarily feel it in your glutes, especially when you pre-squeeze. So again, squeeze those butt cheeks, hold that tension tight, keep building that tension tight, 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 all the way up to the top, and then slowing controlled down. So we're kind of working on excessive tension here. Obviously, if I was doing these for repetitions, you only want to do as much tension as it takes to complete the task. One of my mentors, Anthony Lowe, talks about tension to task. So normally when you're lifting, you only want to squeeze as much as you need to perform the movement. So that way you're not doing extra work. But for the sake of us trying to build that strength, build that mind-body connection, we want, in this exercise right now, I want you to get like excessive glute tension. So squeeze those butt cheeks as hard as you can. Before you lift up, you should almost feel like your legs kind of want to shake. You're squeezing your butt cheeks so hard, it's like you're trying to pull your sit bones together through your butt cheeks. And then keep that squeeze and squeeze hard as you lift all the way up. And then keep that tension squeeze as you lower back down. So for it being a very basic exercise, you know, when you think about, again, we're working on the connection and working on high tension, so that way you can really start to feel connected to the glutes, even in basic movements like that. A lot of times, if you do happen to incorporate clamshells, the exercise we did before, or bridges, this one, into your warm-up, a lot of times we just kind of fly through them and we don't really pay attention to what is working. So you can do that same thing with a single leg. So single leg glute bridge, either just on the ground or elevated. So on this one, you have the added challenge of, let me just try to squeeze my left glute. So again, preloading it, pre-squeezing it, and then keep that tension in the glute as you lift up and then slowly lower down. And you can try the same thing on the other side. So again, now squeeze that right butt cheek, drive through the heel, and come up. So you should really just feel it, and not just, you should feel it the most in the glute when we try to really think about squeezing there, and then just a little bit in the hamstrings. So if you have a band available, try this also with the band around your knees. So sometimes having that added tension where you can drive your knees out against the resistance band and, you know, really think about squeezing your butt. If you feel like you're having a hard time activating your glutes here, try a band around your knees and see if that helps you activate them. So squeezing your butt, lifting up, keep that tension, and come back down. And it's okay if you're at that angle. Some people even feel a better glute squeeze if they do kind of like a frog position bridge. So like I said, get creative with your positioning to see where you feel it the best. All right, so next one, this is where it starts to get a little challenging, even though it seems like a very basic movement. So you're going to be on all fours, and I want you to mimic your squat stance here. So if you tend to have your knees pretty wide, maybe put your knees a little bit wider for this. Ideally, I also want you to have your toes tucked under, because again, we're trying to somewhat mimic a squat movement here. Sorry. So from here, you're going to start stacked. Even though my knees are wide, basically you want hips over knees and shoulders over your hands. Focus on keeping your back nice and flat. And if you're not really sure, you know, you can kind of play around with your back position a little bit, see if you can find what neutral is. So nice flat back, or if you happen to have a mirror near you, use that to see if your back is flat. So we are going to sit back into the bottom of a squat, but you guessed it, before we do, squeeze your butt. So whether it is, so a couple different things you can think about here. Maybe it's just one, squeezing your butt cheeks. Maybe that is enough to help you feel like you get a contraction. Or maybe it's thinking about pulling your sit bones together. So when I talk about sit bones, it's the bones right underneath your butt cheeks. When you really squeeze your glutes, it almost feels like you're trying to pull those sit bones together. So maybe think about that, or you can also think about trying to spread the floor with your knees. So it's like you're trying to push out against the floor. Because I have good friction in these pants on the carpet, I can create that pressure and my knees don't actually slide out. So just play around with whichever cue helps you, as far as, okay, maybe you can just squeeze, maybe it's thinking about pulling those sit bones together, or think about spreading the floor with your knees. But before you even move, squeeze those glutes and then try to keep that squeeze as you sit back as close as you can to your heels without letting your back round. So a couple things that I want you to watch for is when you squeeze your glutes, do you feel like you automatically go into this pooping dog position to go down? Because that is, you know, again, we tend to have the most strength in the glutes up at the top when our hips are in neutral or more extended. So we need to learn how to be able to contract them when my hips are a little bit flexed. So I'm in almost like a 90-degree position at my hips. And can you get a glute squeeze here and then try to maintain that squeeze all the way down? Keep it tight, tight, tight. And then big squeeze to drive yourself back forward. So it's not going to feel like 100% tension necessarily, but you want to try to think about keeping them as tight as you possibly can. And with this movement, you should have a lot of tension in the glutes in a good way, and that you feel them, you feel yourself able to really tense them through here. So that's where I think really preloading the movement, so squeezing your butt cheeks before you even move. It's just like for those of you that are in powerlifting and CrossFit, that whole idea of like screwing your feet into the ground, you know, creating that pressure, pushing your knees out against the ground. It's the same kind of motion to create that kind of torque, not twerk, T-O-R-Q-U-E, torque in the hips by turning the glutes on. So this is probably one of my favorite warm-ups for the squats, because a lot of times people are also very tight in their hips. So you'll get to a point where the further you try to go, the more you'll feel your back want to round. One, because you lose the pressure or the tension in the glutes. And two, just if your hips are tight, you just physically can't go any further without losing room. So try to only go as far as you can, keeping your back flat. This is a really great mobilization to do before your squats, just because it mimics that movement, but you're working both on hip mobility as well as core and glute control. So now we're going to combine a little bit of activation with mobility. So now, if you happen to have this available, great. If you don't have a band, guess what? You can still do this movement without banded tension, but it is really helpful for the glute activation to have the tension of something to push against. So you're going to start upright. So notice shoulders and hips are over my knees. So what have we learned is the number one step: squeeze your glutes before you move. So I'm squeezing my butt cheeks hard. I find it helpful if you keep your hands on your hips. You should feel your pelvis start to come forward. So notice my hands are kind of coming like this. Like I mentioned with the one on all fours, sometimes people have a tendency to come like this, and my pelvis is trying to stay backwards. So you should feel like your pelvis is able to tilt forward as your hips go back. And once again, I'm trying to sit my hips back towards my heels, and then big glute squeeze up. So what the best way to do this drill, so squeeze the glutes first, try to really keep that tight glute squeeze, and whether that's pushing your knees out against the floor or like you're trying to hold in a fart, you don't want to fart on your friend that's behind you, squeeze your butt really hard, and then big squeeze up at the top, and one more to really drive it. So this one, you should feel like your legs are shaking. So even if I'm not using the band, especially moving slowly, this can still be a good, challenging movement. So again, try to have toes tucked under for this one. Hips maybe a little bit, or sorry, knees maybe a little bit wider than hip width. Really squeeze the glutes. So for me, when I don't have the band, I actually find it more helpful to try to push my knees out. So I'm preloading the glutes, really squeezing and sitting back. And I don't want to fart on anybody who might walk in the door there. So I'm holding my glutes tight and then squeeze, big squeeze as hard as you can to come back forward. So I would recommend, if you don't have one of these bands for home, they're really great to be able to do a lot of different hip mobility exercises. But definitely for this warm-up drill, it is super helpful. If you happen to have, you know, the bands with the handles on them and they're tubing, you can maybe even use those attached to something. Maybe just put like a towel or something so it can go right across your pelvis. Sorry, that was the other thing, is you don't want it across your belly, kind of right where those hip bones sit. If you're using the band, you want it across there. So the other thing about doing this banded, and again, you can try it without the band, is once you feel like you've worked it with one leg, you're going to try it single leg. So let me see if I can show you guys better on this side. So basically my foot is in line. I'm just bringing it forward so you can see. But you want to try to get your foot flat, and your ankle is going to be at a little bit of an angle. So my foot is pointing forward, and I'm not pointing it out this direction. It is turned. My knee is facing forward. So once again, preloading that glute, and I'm working my right glute. I'm squeezing my left butt cheek as hard as I can, and then it's slowly lowering me down. I'm not going to be able to go as far because you get a really big stretch here in the adductors, and then big glute drive up. So these are great because it forces you to work one butt cheek at a time, and you're getting a really nice stretch in the opposite adductor or inner thigh. So let's try a couple like this. Big glute squeeze, gently sitting the hips back, feel that nice stretch in the adductor, and then big squeeze up the top, and they get an extra little contraction. It's usually that extra little contraction that really helps you feel connected in this movement. And again, you're getting some nice hip mobility sitting into kind of deeper hip flexion and working that inner thigh. So big glute squeeze up at the top. Slowly let go of just a little bit of that tension to allow your hips to sit back, and then big squeeze up. So notice as I do that, my torso comes forward and my spine is kind of moving as a unit. Again, a lot of times here, either people's whole shoulders and hips go back, but then you're going to feel it a ton in your quads. So with this exercise, whether one knee or both, you essentially should feel like your shoulders kind of stay right over your knees the whole time. So it's more my hips go back, and then my hips come forward. And this is a hip hinge too, by the way. So we're going to work on this as we get into a standing deadlift. But you want to make sure that it's not, oh, I'm here, and then I start to round through my back. That's a really common thing I see. So if you just think torso up to torso down, kind of like you're bowing, and then hips are going back. So you get a big excursion of the hips backward and forward, but generally your shoulders kind of stay centered over your knees. Take another little sip of water so I don't cough into your ears. All right. So now we're going to get to standing. So those are kind of all of your basics. Like I said, you don't need to do every single one of those before every warm-up, but the ones that you maybe felt like worked the best for you, you're like, oh man, I feel really connected to my glutes right now in a way maybe that you don't normally before a workout. That tells you that movement, whether it was the clamshells or maybe the bridges or maybe it was that banded hip hinge, whichever variation it was, you know, that's going to be the best drill for you. You don't need to do all of these, but at the same time, if you feel like you tend to struggle with this and you found it helpful to go kind of in stepwise fashion from easiest to now we're getting into the more challenging stuff, then it may be worth for a time until it becomes a little more automatic for you to incorporate all of these into a warm-up until it's like, okay, I'm at the point where I can do just one of these drills and I feel good to go, but it might be do them all in the beginning. Okay, so I'm actually going to raise this up just a hair. So now we're going to work on assisted squats. So you can do this typically if you have anything sturdy. If you go to a CrossFit or powerlifting gym, you know, obviously using a squat rig can be helpful. At home, using any kind of a sturdy piece of furniture that's not going to go over on you is good too. So what I want you to do, again, preload those glutes, squeeze them as hard as you can, and then see if you can keep that squeeze. I'm going to have you use this for a little bit of assistance because sometimes it's helpful to keep that tension if you're holding on to something. And also notice I'm going to sit my weight kind of back against it. So squeeze your glutes hard. I'm going to sit down, try to go as low as I can, making sure I'm keeping that tension in my glutes. They're like an elevator, and they're slowly lowering me down. And I'm only going to go as low as I can, keeping my back nice and flat. And then big glute squeeze back up to drive out of the movement. Again, now that we're getting into a standing squat movement, you might feel it a little more in the quads. That's okay. So we want to think about, let's preload the glutes first, squeeze your butt, and see if you can keep that tension. In a squat movement, it should almost feel like your butt cheeks are the ones that are, if they were a little cloud, if you had a floating cloud like in Mario Bros or whatever, jumping around, like a little cloud under your butt, and it's just slowly lowering you down. That's what you want to picture. That's what you want to feel like. It's your hips that are allowing you to move. So the other thing too I want you to notice is as I'm sitting down into my squat, I'm not doing like this. So you want to start, not only are you preloading the glutes with a squeeze, but then you load them first with a slight sit back of the hips, and then continue sitting down. And once again, I'm thinking about driving my knees out away from each other to keep that glute squeeze, and then in big butt drive to stand back up. If you find it helpful for activation, you can do this drill with the band around your knees. If you have a little more tension in the band, that might be helpful to help you feel like you're getting a really good squeeze through the glutes, and then drive as you stand back up. Obviously, you can try the same thing freestanding. I think just sometimes to really be able to focus on squeezing the glutes, it's helpful to do it assisted first. You can try it with or without the band. Again, I'm just giving you options for you to try to see what works best for you. So then kind of the most advanced, if you will, is now being able to apply that as you're doing just kind of your standing air squat. So think about squeezing your butt and just slightly sitting the hips back, and then sitting down with it and not losing that tension as you go all the way down, and then big squeeze to drive up and out. So you want to think about preload, keep that tension as much as you can. Let me know if you feel like you're one of those that, and I say one of those, I say that because so many of my athletes are like, yeah, okay, got it. Got the squeeze up at the top, and then the second you start to bend, you kind of lose it. So that's why we've worked in all these different positions, because hopefully you're able to feel, okay, I am able to kind of connect and feel that squeeze as my hip is flexing or bending. So squeeze here, just slowly letting go of that tension. So you should still feel tension, but again, it's like you're just, blowing air out of a balloon through pursed lips, not just letting it go out. Your glutes should have tension all the way down. And again, we're at this point thinking about, let me try to squeeze as tight as I can just to get it kicking on. But ultimately, if I were doing air squats, that's very energy consuming. If I'm like, let me get as much tension as possible the entire way down, that's a lot. So if I were doing a workout with squats, I'm not necessarily going to be doing that tension the entire time, losing my voice here. But incorporating that in your workout, in your warm-up, just to get that connection is going to be great for many people who struggle with that. But then once it comes to the workout, you then, that's kind of where it gets to be almost more advanced, if you will, is learning how to then keep that tension, but only apply as much as you need to achieve the task. So the door is locked, but if I were going to try to open it, I do a gentle open and it opens the door. That's as much tension as I need to perform that task. Whereas if I come at it and I'm like, slam, and then Pear would be very angry at me for breaking our door because, Hulk smash. But either way, it would mess up the hinges. You don't walk through every door like that. So you don't need to perform every squat like that. But definitely when you're getting up to, if you're doing Olympic weightlifting, you need those fast, powerful movements. You can think about that big tension, or if you're working into those higher percentages, so like 90% of your 1 rep max and above, you are going to want that much glute tension as you initiate your lift. So now if you happen to have a stick, I want you to practice with this. So a couple different things here. The other thing that is going to be really great for helping you activate your glutes is by paying attention to your spinal position here. I'm going to get my arm that's close to you out of the way. So you should have your your head, your upper back, and your tailbone all touching the stick. So we're going to start with the hip hinge. So before I even move, I'm getting that glute squeeze, drawing my rib cage down to kind of reset me in neutral. A lot of times people are hanging out like this. So rib cage is a little bit flared out, butt is kind of kicked back. So when you squeeze, bringing that rib cage down, squeezing the glutes a little bit, it gives you a more neutral spine. So keeping that glute tension, I'm thinking about driving my knees out to keep my glutes squeezed. I'm going down into a hip hinge as if I'm setting up for a deadlift, and then big glute squeeze back up. So we're just practicing now, applying that glute tension as I'm also keeping a neutral spine. You can do the same thing with a squat. Typically, it's easier to start with a hip hinge. So a lot of times I find it helpful for people to start with the hip hinge, keeping that nice neutral spine, and then sit down into a squat as low as you can without losing pressure off the stick. So kind of the common mistakes that I'll see in a squat is that one, right away at initiation, the upper back pops off, and that's because I'm doing stripper butt on the way out. So you want to think about I'm breaking at my hips, not breaking at my lower back. So back stays nice and flat. The other thing that I'll see is at the bottom, people start to round off. So notice I lost my contact at my tailbone. So really feel for those 3 points of contact and make sure that you're maintaining them, and then you can stand straight up out of it. And once you feel like you're able to keep that neutral spine with this kind of hinge into the squat, see if you can squat straight down. So notice I'm still kind of quote unquote breaking at the hip. I'm sitting my hips back just slightly and then sit straight down as low as you can without your butt rounding off. That's generally where you lose the glute tension, and where you lose spinal position is where you get that butt wink, if you've heard that term, or the rounding under. So keep that nice flat back. That's where the glute tension is really important to help you keep that neutral spine. So once you do that, then practicing it in the back rack position is generally where it's most challenging. When it comes to squatting, obviously overhead is even harder, but for now we're just going to talk back squat. So before you initiate, once again, especially if your shoulders and upper back are a little bit tight, the tendency is going to be here to make sure to squeeze your butt, draw that rib cage down. You should be nice and centered, upper body over your lower body, not here or here. Very rarely do I see this in my lifters, but a lot of times I will see this. So really squeeze that butt, draw that rib cage down. This is your starting point. And then even with weight on my back, if I were holding a barbell, it's an ever so slight sitting back with my hips to load my glutes first, and then sitting straight down. The other common problem that I'll see is that people just go to sit straight down and they initiate with the either knees forward or knees out, but that loads the knees and the quads first. And you want just ever so slightly to load the glutes first and then sit straight down. Obviously, I'm not going like this. If you're trying to do a heavy back squat, you're not going to be doing this to initiate your movement. But you do want to load the hips first, and it's a subtle difference of here versus here. So really try to pay attention to how you initiate your movement to achieve those tasks. For both your squat and your deadlift. Typically, obviously the deadlift is a little easier to start with the hips, but I would say the main thing that I will see with people's deadlifts is starting the movement. So let me do this so it's a little easier for you to picture. So if I'm doing, say, RDL starting from the top, it would be initiating the movement like this, again with butt back, versus here, and back is nice and flat. So you don't want to break at the back, quote unquote. Notice my kind of center of rotation when I do like that is at my lower back versus here, it's my hips. So, it may be helpful to video yourself to see what you're doing in your lifts, to initiate the movement, see what you're doing at the bottom of the movement. Generally, for all of those, you shouldn't see any movement through the spine. It should be all at the hips as you go through that, and not getting any extra extension through the lower back or rounding at the bottom of the squat, which is the other thing we typically see. So those are all the drills I have for you. We went through a lot. We started at laying down on your stomach, squeezing both butt cheeks, then one at a time. And also, you shouldn't feel like your whole body has to move when you're laying on the ground doing that. So just the butt cheeks. It shouldn't feel like a whole body exercise. Then laying on your side, doing the clamshells, really focusing on pre-squeeze. Only lift as high as you can without your pelvis shifting around. And then going to the feet elevated glute bridge with or without a band around your knees. If you find it helpful, use a band. And then going to the hand heel rock, so that exercise where we're on all fours, so on hands and knees, squeezing the glutes, trying to drive those knees out, sitting your hips back towards your heels, into the kneeling hip hinge, again, with or without a band. I highly recommend using a band for that one. That really gives you good resistance to keep good glute activation throughout the movement. So if you can, do that one with the glute squeeze. And then, with the band to get a better glute squeeze. And then into the standing, potentially using a rig or something to help with assisted squats to see if that allows you to, it just takes out some degrees of freedom, if you will, and gives you a little more support to be able to focus on the glutes. So starting maybe with a supported squat to focus on keeping a nice neutral spine, activating the glutes through the range of motion, and then trying to do a freestanding squat, maybe even using that stick if it's helpful to give you feedback on what your spine is doing and trying to keep a neutral spine. And then into practicing, in a back squat position or even front squat with either just a PVC pipe or a bar if you're wanting to do barbell movements. And then banded, doing banded squats or pause squats can also be helpful to check in to see, am I actually squeezing the way I think I should be or feel like I should be. So that is everything. So I'm going to answer some questions now. I see one in the Q&A, but for those of you who haven't asked any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A function, and I'll get to them here in a second. I'm going to take a sip of water. Again, so I can hopefully make it the rest of the way without coughing on you guys, or in your ear rather. But like I said, feel free to put questions in the chat. So if hamstrings and lower back take over, should we roll these out and relax them before training? Potentially. If you feel like, one, sometimes if you are also just kind of high stress, a lot of times we carry a lot of tension and stress in the shoulders, but similarly, we carry it in the low back and the hips and pelvis too. So doing some of that when you, I'm also looking at another note we have here. So if you roll that out and you feel like that helps relax tension, and then you follow it up with these drills and you feel like you're able to really focus on the glutes, then absolutely. But kind of the caveat to that is, honestly, everybody's going to be a little different. You might find that rolling those muscles out before you do some of these drills maybe makes them want to take over more. Hopefully that's not the case. But you don't know until you try, honestly. So if you're one of those, I'd say try it before one of your workouts. Maybe do kind of a lighter lifting day. Don't try a new warm-up routine necessarily before you're going to like max out that day. So before maybe an easy to moderate workout, try rolling out your lower back and hamstrings. See if that relieves some of the tension, helps with mobility, and then follow it up with these glute drills. Because the other benefit to rolling your lower back and your hamstrings is that if those are tight and you're trying to get into either a deadlift position or definitely down into a squat, then I'm going to run out of room pretty quickly if, my back is tight here and it's pulling me like this. I can only go down so far because of that tightness. So rolling those out is just also potentially going to help you get into a better position before you go to do your workout. So I would say try it. Obviously, if for any reason you feel like, no, I almost feel like it's harder to access my glutes, then obviously don't do it. But I would say in general, rolling the areas around the hips that are tight and working on hip mobility are helpful before workouts. Good question. All right. Any other thoughts? So one other thing we'll touch on, what are some common causes of a hip shift and how to avoid them? That's a really good question. So a lot of different things can go into it, and that's where getting evaluated can be very beneficial to see what specifically is causing yours. But in general, it's hip tightness and or weakness, which I know kind of covers everything. But that's where, one, if you don't know if you have a hip shift or not, maybe videoing yourself, see, do you tend to lean one way or the other? But commonly, as we see someone, you may not see it as much from the front, but as you see someone squat down, let me move away from you guys, see if you can see me squat down. So if my left hip is a little tight, when I go down, if this hip isn't able to flex anymore, a lot of times I then end up having to shift, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration. We don't usually see that big of a shift. But if I'm really tight on one side, when I get to the kind of end range of my left hip, it's automatically going to kind of push me to the right. So a lot of times the side that you're shifting away from is maybe tighter. It's not able to get that full depth. So doing some different hip flexion mobility exercises is going to help get into that bottom position. And then similarly, if maybe you have a history of injury on that side, or, we all are kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Asymmetrical. It's normal to feel like one side tends to be tighter or tends to be stronger than the other side. It's just how we live our life. We tend to carry a bag on a certain side. Also, all of the organs in our bodies are different on each side. So we're not even built symmetrical. So it's normal to feel different side to side. So sometimes if a side is weaker, you may also find that you shift away from that because it doesn't feel as strong. So it's a matter of kind of playing around with, one, can I physically, correct that hip shift if I'm thinking about it? So then maybe it's more of a motor control or a strength issue. If you feel like no matter what in the bottom of your squat, maybe you try to shift more to that side to correct the hip shift. You're like, ooh, it feels really pinchy and I just feel like I can't get there. Then it's probably more of a mobility issue. So that's where, the glute work can be helpful for sure if it's more of a strength thing, but sometimes it's hip tightness that causes that. So also a really great question. So thank you all so much for joining me today. I am not going to lie, I'm a little impressed with myself to have stayed in the time limit for all the exercises I wanted to be able to share with you guys. I wanted to give you all the options so you can try and see what works best for you, and then take what you please. If you want to do it all, amazing. I support that. But I understand that time is a factor a lot in workouts, so I would rather you get your one or two that you felt like you got the biggest bang for your buck, and incorporate those into your warm-up, and then go from there. So before you guys head out, perfect. Pear just shared that for me, special eval link. So we are running a special for you guys for attending. We're doing a $49 injury, basically an injury screen evaluation. So even if you're not injured, we're going to take a look at your squat, hinge, push, pull, carry, all of those basic functional movements that apply to your workouts, that apply to your day-to-day movements. And we'll go through some of these things and look even more in depth at shoulder range of motion, spine range of motion, hips and ankles, to see where your limitations are and what needs to be worked on to, one, help improve your performance in those lifts, and two, help prevent injuries and get ahead of it before it becomes a problem. And then definitely if you're already dealing with pain, trying to get to the root cause of that, which typically has to do with weakness and tightness in different areas in the way that you're moving, we want to be able to help with that. So for you all attending, we have that $49 special. So click on that link that in the chat. It shows as Movement RX. That's Per hiding behind the camera, and yeah, you know what I mean, behind the keyboard. And he posted that special eval link. So that is where you can go and sign up. It can be either virtual or in person. If you're local, I would love to have you in person. Our office is in Kearney Mesa. That's where you see this and all the cars driving by here in bright, sunny San Diego. But if you are out of town in Germany, I would love to be able to work with you online. We're still going to be able to go through all of these movements. I can watch you move and go through some of the different things that might be contributing to your pain or that might be holding you back performance-wise. So I want to help you be able to lift better and feel stronger, and then get out of pain if you're dealing with pain. So I'm excited to be able to offer that to you guys. And thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday morning for most of you, but evening for those in Europe. But thank you so much. Let me hop over to YouTube real quick, make sure there's no comments. Perfect. Awesome. Well, I'll hang out for another minute or so if anybody has any last minute questions. But everybody enjoy your beautiful Saturday. Hopefully it's beautiful where you are. Finally nice weekend weather here in San Diego. It's been kind of gloomy the last few weeks. No problem. Thank you all for being here. And let me also, if you guys just have any questions, I'm also going to put my email in the chat if you just have some questions for me. And then let me also pop that over to YouTube. All right. All right, everybody. That is all our time. Thanks again, and I will hopefully see you again on